Hello and welcome to part 10 of building a beach buggy with me. First things first, I've got to apologise a little bit. There's been a bit of a wait between the last video and this one. A lot's happened since then. I've been very busy doing work. I bought myself a new truck, snapped my electric bike in half on Christmas Day. I bought a new truck. I built a new electric bike. I bought a truck. I put a new top on my workbench in here as well. That's really nice, solid and everything. Oh, did I mention I bought a new truck as well? So I've been mucking about with that, doing all sorts of other stuff, but I'm back. We're ready to do some more work, and this time we're getting on with the front suspension. Before we get into that stuff, I just want to say, as usual, thanks to everybody that's subscribed and everything to the channel. We're at just over 2,000 subscribers now. I think 2,200 and something at the time of filming this. So again, over the moon with that, but please don't let that stop you from telling all your mates about it. We're also pushing dangerously close to 100,000 views, which, you know, I've only been doing this, I think it's just coming up to a year now, and 100,000 views, to me, that's just more than I ever expected. So as soon as we get to that 100,000, you have my word, we're going to do something special. I think we're going to do like a little prize giveaway or something like that. So the more views, the sooner we get to that 100,000, the sooner we get to give away a prize. So that's something to look forward to. That's enough of my talking. You didn't come here to listen to that. You came here to see some work. So let's get on with the front suspension. Finally, yes!
Okay, it's time to move on to the front suspension. Now, the nice thing about this is we've got ourselves a brand spanking new right-hand drive, height adjustable front suspension beam, or front axle, whatever you want to call it. Now, the nice thing about that is it needs absolutely nothing, and it's ready to just bolt directly into the car. Kind of. There we go, one freshly butchered brand new front beam. Got those nasty shock towers off and thrown in the bin where they belong. So we're going to make some new ones. Now, I could have cut these out with a grinder. It would have taken me forever. It would have made a mess. It's how I've always done things in the past. But my mate Nick from Fusion Engineering has got a plasma table, and he very kindly said he'd cut these out for me. So what I did was drew the shapes up on my sign writing software at work, which is actually really good for doing sort of vector drawing of these sorts of shapes. Emailed that across to him. He got these cut for me within a few days, so thanks for that. Really appreciate it. We've got some bits of 12mm plate there, some bits of 4mm plate there. So I'm sure some of you have figured out what the plan is, but for those of you that haven't, stick around and you'll see what I'm getting up to. But before I can go any further, I need to clean off all this mill scale, clean up the edges where the plasma cutter's been round, just get them super neat and tidy, and then we can start doing some welding. This is going to be exciting, this. Never seen a front beam like this before. That's those all clamped in position now, all cleaned up, ready to tack together and then to finish weld. But you might be asking yourself, why am I doing this? Why cut off some perfectly good shock towers on a perfectly good front beam? Well, some of you might have figured it out, but I'm going to explain it to you for those that don't.
Right, explanation time. Why am I doing all this extra work to this front beam, which many people would deem to be completely unnecessary? Well, you could argue that it's unnecessary, and to be fair, you would have a valid argument, because there's no reason why I couldn't have taken this aftermarket front beam, bolted it in the car. It would have worked absolutely fine, just the way that Volkswagen intended, but that's just not me. I've got a few, what I think are pretty good reasons for doing it. If you're familiar with these things, you'll know that in 1966, Volkswagen changed from what's known as an early king and link pin style front beam to a later ball joint style front beam. Now, I'm of the opinion that the later ball joint style beams are objectively better, you know. Ball joints, you know, it's just more advanced technology than a king and link pin. But I'm also of the opinion that the early ones are much better looking. Now, there are quite a lot of differences between an early and late one. The tubes on the early ones are closer together. The trailing arms are a different shape. But the only thing that really bothers me about the way that these later ones look is that shock tower. Now, regardless of the year, the shock tower is made the same way. It's two halves of stamped steel, and then sort of spot welded around the flange, around the outside flange. But like I say, the early ones, I just think they're better looking. So when you look at the front quarter view of a buggy, which is one of the angles it looks the coolest from, you can see that shock tower. On a Beetle, you don't really see it because it's obscured by the front wing and everything else. So that's the main reason, is the aesthetics of it. I don't for a second want people to think that I'm, you know, trying to trick people into thinking that I've built the car on an earlier chassis than I really have, because anybody that really knows what they're looking at will be able to tell that it's a ball joint beam with different style shock towers. It's just because I think the early ones look nicer, but I want the performance and the reliability of everything else of a later one. The other reason for it is I wanted to put a little bit of extra weight in the front of the car. Now, anybody that's ever driven a buggy will tell you the same thing. The handling is pretty lively. Obviously, they don't weigh much. We've shortened the thing by over a foot, so you're basically asking for the thing to do wheelies. It doesn't take a huge amount of power to get the front wheels off the ground in these things, and without spoiling any surprises, we are going to have significantly more power than most other buggies out there. So that's another thing to bear in mind. The other complaint is that when you're under braking and steering, sometimes the front wheels can sort of skid forward like this a bit, again due to the, you know, the lack of weight in the front of these things. Some people swear blind that you need to put weight in the front. Some people swear blind that you don't. I think a lot of it depends on how much horsepower you got in the back, your wheel and tyre size on the front, the weight of everything else in the car. So I didn't want to put anything in there that was obvious. You know, I don't want to be screwing blocks of lead to the front or anything like that because it looks horrible. So this, to me, was a good way of doing it, making these shock towers out of solid steel. They weigh significantly more than the original ones did, and the weight of this front beam is, you know, noticeably heavier than a standard one. So it's getting the weight exactly where we want it, as far forward as possible and as far outboard as possible. Now, the other, it's a minor reason for doing it, but I have seen this on other aftermarket beams where they aren't fully welded around the tubes and again around those seams. So you can paint the thing up so it looks all pretty and nice. Then it doesn't take long for the rusts to start, like, you know, coming out the seams and everything else. So my solution, it was to just chop them off, throw them in the bin, make some new ones. Again, some people would say it's unnecessary. If you think it's unnecessary, don't do it to your car. I'm doing it to mine because it's mine and I like making stuff. So hopefully that clears things up. And yeah, you might have learned something about Volkswagen front suspension. So that's enough waffling. Let's get back to doing some work. If you haven't figured out why it's made out of 3 pieces and not just one big thick piece, don't get me wrong, it quite easily could have been, and a lot of aftermarket beams are manufactured that way. But what I'm trying to do is, as I've explained, replicate the looks of an early one, which is actually formed out of 2 halves of a very thin gauge sheet steel, stamped and then brought together in this centre line here and sort of spot welded around. So by the time I've welded a nice fillet into each side there and rounded off the outside corners with a sander and then got some primer and paint on there, that will all blend together and look like one piece. So it will look like the stamped steel, but it will weigh a hell of a lot more and yeah, should achieve exactly what we want it to. Okay, before I can finish weld these, I need to put a few tacks around to hold them all together so I can then remove them and then weld them flat on the bench there. So I'll just put a tack every 5 or 6 inches or so, and that will be enough to hold it together during the welding process. There we go, that's those welded all the way round.
So I've put a bit of a weave on it, a little bit of an undercut to get things to really sort of flow in that sort of shape, if that makes sense. So by the time I've dumped a load of primer and paint on there, that weld will visually disappear. So next up, I need to make some holes in the top to mount the shocks to. I did think about literally just drilling a hole and tapping a thread to put an M12 bolt in there, but we can do better than that. So I had a little dig around in my box of tricks, found a nice little offcut of solid round bar. So let's make some bungs to weld in the top there to mount the shocks to. There we go, that's a couple of those made. So M12 thread down the middle, got that sort of shoulder there, so that fits into there like that. We'll run a fillet around there, and then a plug weld on the back there. Then we got some super solid shock mounts. Okay, I'm now ready to weld these to this, get them on there for the final time. What I'm going to do is, when these slide over the tubes, I want them to finish flush on the outside there. The reason for that is because the lower shock mounting doodah on the trailing arm, on the ball joint beams, it's a bit further out, so I'm gaining myself a little bit more room this way, every way I can. So those are a little bit longer than standard. These are going to be welded out a little bit further than standard. All these little things just to add that distance up there. Hopefully that makes sense. What I've done is just sanded a bevel around the outside of those tubes there, and done like a corresponding bevel with a tungsten burr in the die grinder there, just so that when that is fitted to that, it leaves a little channel for me to fill up with weld, so that by the time I've sanded it smooth, there's plenty of weld left there, so it's going to be more than strong enough. I'm going to MIG those on, and I'm going to do it with a series of small tacks. The reason for that being, I want to sort of minimise heat build up there really, because the bearings need to press into the inside of these tubes. Don't want any kind of warpage or anything like that. So if it was anything else, I'd run a big fillet around it in one hit, you know, but because I want to keep that heat down, tack, 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 that's the way we're going to do it. So yeah, let's get these on. Nice. After I'd finished welded everything on that front beam, I'd sanded everything flush on the outside and smoothed out all the bits I needed to do, and basically got everything prepped and ready to go to the sandblaster. So now that's done, it's time to give the trailing arm some love. So let's get on to that. Now that the front beam is ready to be sent off to the grip blasters, we might as well send the trailing arms there at the same time, so I can put it all together at the same time when it all gets back. One thing I need to do before I do that is get these ball joints out. They're all old, worn out, absolutely knackered. They're a press fit into the trailing arms. There's loads of how-to videos on how to change these things, so I won't go too in-depth with it. But first things first, need to get this rubber boot out the way. So jam in there with a screwdriver, pop that little retainer ring out, get rid of that. Then our rubber bit can come off. It's all going to be full of grease and gunge and all manner of gear in there. Yeah, look at that. Yeah. Right, we're going to clean all that garbage out, and then we can go press them out with my mate's hydraulic press, because I haven't got room for one in this shed. Right, that's all the manky bits removed. We can take those to our mate Kip down the road, who's the local Volkswagen guru, and use his press. Get him in there so I don't get my van all dirty. Winner! Come on, you mate. There we go. Great success. Okay, that's these little guys out, pesky little things. So before I press the new ones in, because obviously they're going to be just as tight going in as those were coming out, I want to paint these so they're nice and shiny, just like everything else. So the last thing I want to do is paint these and then have to try and press those back in. So what I'm going to do is get these sandblasted, like so many other bits you've seen. I'm prepping those for that process now. But what I want to do is get these blasted, then I can get them back, then I can press the new ball joints in, then I can prime and paint them all in one go. So, you know, we haven't got any dodgy edges or anything like that. So just prepping these to be blasted now. One thing that's always annoyed me about these trailing arms on all Volkswagens pretty much is they've got some odd little lumps and bumps in the casting, like things like that. I don't... If anybody's got the answer to what those are, please let me know, because I can't see that they serve any kind of purpose at all.
It was only when I was editing this video that I remembered that those bits are there so that you can get a clamp around them to run a sway bar or an anti-roll bar on the front. But we're not running an anti-roll bar, so we don't need those bits.
What I'm going to do is run around with the grinder, sand out any sort of casting marks or odd little lumps and bumps and things like that, just so that they look a little bit prettier when they're on there. No one's ever going to look at them, but I know, it's how I like to do things. So let's get some sanding done. That's loads better. Should have been a sculptor. It's only a small thing, but for the sake of a few sanding discs and a bit of mess, or quite a lot of mess, it's definitely worth doing. I think it's going to make it that little bit nicer when it's done. So before I do anything else, I'm going to have myself a bit of a clean up, because this place is an absolute mess.
2,000 years later.
Here we are. We finally got the front beam and the trailing arms and a couple of other little bits back from the blaster. We had a little bit of a delay with that, but it was nobody's fault, so we can finally get on to doing some priming. These were only blasted yesterday, and I've kept them inside overnight, because when you've got a bare metal surface like that, the last thing you want to do is give anything a chance to start rusting. So stick it inside overnight in front of the radiators, and we'll get some primer on it now, get it all sealed in there so it'll never go rusty ever again. That's the plan.
Okie dokie, next job we've got to get the new ball joints pressed into the trailing arms. You'll notice that I've primered them. I left that surface in there bare metal, I've masked it out so I could just get some primer on there to stop them rusting, because there was a couple of days in between me priming those and getting these pressed in, so I just wanted to protect them from any sort of flash rust. So got a bit of change of scenery today. Look, we're at my mate Tony's garage. He's very kindly let me come in on a Sunday, and his son Noah is actually a fan of the channel. So Noah, if you're watching this, do your homework.
Anyway, yeah, we're going to press those in. So what I've done is made up, well, I say made up, I cut a piece of scaffold tube and just faced it off in the lathe there, so it's completely square. The reason for that is that needs to fit in there so that it can rest under that shoulder, and just careful I don't damage the rubber boot there. It needs to sit on that shoulder so it's got something to press on to get it in. So the upper ball joints go in from this way, the lower ball joints, they come in from the other side. So they're same principle, slightly different application. The top ones can be oriented in whatever direction you like, really. You've got full 360 movement on those. The lower ones, they've got these little, you can just see it, those sort of dimples in either side, there and there. The reason for that is these ball joints only really pivot in one direction. They've got very little movement in the other direction. So the idea of that is you line it up fore and aft so that it can pivot that way, if that makes sense. So if you're doing this yourself, that is very critical, that you need to get those sort of clocked properly in the bottom ones. Make sense? Hope so. We've already done those two, so they're in there. So pretty straightforward. Basically just line everything up, give it a pump, and then they're in. So we'll get that done now. All right, there we go. So I've got a tube on the top there, putting the ball joint in, and then a socket on the bottom acting like a sort of receiver, if you like, to sort of support the trailing arm all the way around the outside. So we're all lined up. We'll give it a pump. Yeah, it's going in there nice and straight. So then we'll basically just give it a pump. You see the gauge there, we get about five tons of force there, so you know they're not going to fall out in a hurry. And then just pump it up until we're bottomed out. Just about there. Oh no, got a little bit more on that side. Sometimes it's a case of just moving things around a bit and making sure it's pressed so it's all the way flush. After I pressed the new ball joints into the freshly primered trailing arms, I next went on and primered all those front suspension parts, gave it another good few coats of epoxy primer to try and fill up any little pits or divots or anything like that. And then we sanded it all the way up through the grades, all the way up to 600 grit, so that we could get some black on there so that they look as nice as possible. Is it excessive for suspension parts? Probably. Is it going to look cool? Definitely. So let's pick up when we started putting some black on this thing and making it all nice and shiny. That's better. Really happy with the finish we got on that. Not too bad for spraying it outdoors on the patio in January. Just goes to show, it's all in the prep work. So that's the beam done, ready to bolt on. I've also done all the trailing arms and everything as well, all nice new stainless hardware and all that business. Restored the steering box as well. Thankfully it was in really good working order, so it didn't actually need to be rebuilt. So it was basically just a case of cleaning it all up, giving it a paint job, changing all the bolts for stainless ones. So that's ready to go on. But obviously none of that can go on until this goes on, and it's just held on with 4 bolts through the front there. These are the ones that I was doing all the mock-up with. They might look just like normal M12 bolts, but they're actually metric fine. So normal M12s are a 1.75 thread pitch, I think, and these are a 1.5 thread pitch. So those are the ones we use for mock-up. These are the ones we're actually going to use on the car. Now, if you're familiar with ARP, they are the best, you know. They might have the worst logo in the world, but they make the best bolts in the world. And there are some companies selling these bolts specifically as mounting bolts for Volkswagen front beams. Now, you pay way over the odds for them. You get 4 in a packet. If you get them direct from ARP, you get 5 in a packet, and you get them for about half the price. So if you're doing this yourself, that's the part number that you need. and you can save yourself a few quid and have some nice shiny bolts. So that's enough talking. Let's get the thing bolted on. This is exciting. I've been looking forward to this bit. All right, it's time to get this thing on there. Excuse the noise if you can hear it. I'm working with the door open because I haven't really got a lot of room in here. What I'm going to do, because I'm going to Loctite these in there with some green Loctite, because I don't ever want them coming out unless I choose to take them out. But because it's an aftermarket frame head, an aftermarket beam and aftermarket bolts, instead of me goobing them all up with Loctite and bolting it in and finding out that something doesn't tally up, I'm gonna do a dry run first. You know, better safe than sorry. So let's get this on there and see what happens. Oh, it really is heavy, this thing. Oh, let's get that one started. Oh, it looks pretty already. Aha! This is why we do a dry run. Perfect example. I've run out of thread before the head of the bolt is seated against the beam. I'll show you what I mean. You see that in there? We've just run out of thread and we're not quite tight. So what we're going to need to do is put a thicker washer in there. That's not the end of the world. I'm going to make some nice stainless ones. That gives me something to do, as if I didn't have enough already. That's better. Just whipped up a few of them, got a nice little bevel on the edge there. Stainless steel, so they're not going to rust, and it means that these bolts are going to work properly. So let's get this thing cranked up. One thing that's always worth doing when you're Loctiting stuff in is just going in the threads and giving it a good clean out. So I've gone in there with a little furry brush and a bit of brake cleaner and whatnot, clean all the threads out. So let's get this thing on. Nice bit of that on there. I love final assembly. Look how nice and shiny everything is, and clean. People think working on old cars is all grime and dirt, but when you're building something like this and you get to use the nice shiny bits that you've spent ages making, there's nothing better than that to me. So we're gonna just nip those up, have a little look in there. Sorry if my head's in the way. Oh, that's perfect. Let's get the rest of them in. Oh, there's some satisfaction there. Right, now those are nipped up, we're going to go at them with a torque wrench, get them torqued up. The right torque setting for the M12 ones of these is 43 foot-pounds or 58 Newton meters. So that's what we're going with. There we go. Okay, now that that is on there, it's time to get all the gubbins that goes inside on there. So I'll give a little explanation of how these things work. I'm assuming that most people are familiar with it, same as I did for the back end, but if you're not, I'll just show you what's what. This up here is the front beam that the car originally came with. Why didn't you reuse that one, I hear you ask? Well, the car at some point had a bit of a front ender, and this thing has got a little bit of a bend in it. So instead of reusing that knackered old junk, I used a new one and modified it to do all the things I need it to do. If you've been watching, you know what's what. Basically, the way they work is these, the trailing arms, that hang out the side of there, that eventually the wheel bolts to, they pivot up and down. So they pivot on this joint here. Now, inside there is a stack of flat pieces of steel, but it's not just any old steel, it's spring steel. It's got a memory, like we explained on the back end, so it's springy. Now, those bolts there, they locate into, see that little divot that's sort of drilled into it there? It's the same in the middle. So it locks it in at the middle there, which allows each side to then twist independently. So that's what provides you with the spring, the bounce, you know, and then the shock that goes from there is just the damper to control that bounce. So when you do remove these, it is pretty important to keep them all in the same orientation and stacked in the right order, because you don't want it to be twisting the way that it's, you know, not used to twisting. So these things are always manky as hell because they got no how many years worth of grease and grime and whatnot in there. So I've loosened up that bolt in the middle, and we'll bring that out. See what I mean? Absolutely gross. There we go. So you see the little divot in the middle. Now, what makes the new beam significantly different to this one is an adjustable beam. So this allows us to adjust the height of the suspension. So on that one over there, you see it was just a hole, unadjustable. You couldn't move that central portion. These ones, you can move them. So you see we've got sort of splines on that part here, and then pretty tight, but yeah, you can move that up and down, and then when you get it where you want it, that part then bolts on, those splines lock into there, and then that way you can fine-tune the ride height of the car. These adjusters are amazing. What people used to do back in the day was cut the middle section out of the beam, rotate it and weld it back in. Then they went on to another type of adjusters, which again involved chopping a big section out the middle and welding them in. Now, these are the go-to. So it allows you to completely fine-tune the ride height, get it exactly where you want it. So that's how they work. Let's get those cleaned up and get them in there. Right, that's those out and cleaned up and re-greased and everything else. Before I can put those in, I need to put these bearings and these seals in. So you see those bearings in there? They're just sort of tapped in, just inboard a bit to leave enough room for these seals to go on. So before I put those in, I'll put a little bit of copper grease around them and tap them in with a socket. Easy peasy. Alright, so we'll just get a little bit of that. Don't need much. Then she goes in there. And this socket's just slightly smaller in the diameter. Try and get it in nice and straight. Only needs to be about 1/8 of an inch in. There we go. One for luck. Beautiful. And then that seal, I'll just go and grab that. And that again, different socket, just fits over and rests on that little shoulder in there. Oh, turns out that's not as tight as I thought it was. Don't need that, just pop it in. There, 1 down, 3 to go. Right, the torsion springs are in, all completely slathered in grease. Now it's time to get some trailing arms in there. Apologies if the light here is a bit naff. We're in the dark end of the shed, but that needs to be lubed up. So get some of the good stuff and loads of that. So this is top right. Let's try and get the angle right. About there. That's the one. There we go. She's in. And that's just held in with a little grub screw, and I made some stainless ones because I don't like any mild steel fasteners on this sort of thing, because all they do is go rusty. So I've got some nice little grub screws. I was only able to get ones with a flat end, so I just got them too long, cut them down and just machined that little profile in the end there. And that goes in there. Cool. Now let's do the other three. There we go. That's all the trailing arms in and a bunch of other bits as well, because I got a little bit carried away yesterday and didn't get out of the garage till about 1 o'clock in the morning. But if you want to do something like this, it's going to take a few late nights. What else have we done? Got the steering box on there, which I haven't really mentioned that so far because it's not the most exciting thing in the world, and I got really lucky with it. The steering box that was on the car worked perfectly. There was no play at all in it, worked perfectly smooth. It was just really filthy and rusty. So basically just cleaned it up with a wire wheel and a grinder, gave it a coat of epoxy primer and then a grey epoxy top coat, the same as the master cylinder and the gearbox and a bunch of other bits. So we got that on there, got the pitman arm all painted up all nice. Grease nipples and all that are in there as well. One part I haven't mentioned up until now is I made a sort of custom steering stop to limit how far the steering travels when I know exactly what wheels and tyres are going on here, because the factory Volkswagen ones, can I get to it? Yeah, like that. They're not the prettiest things in the world, so I thought we could do a little bit better than that. What else have I done? I've hooked up that main brake line. So all that headache of running it through the spine and working out exactly where it needed to exit was totally worth it when I was able to just go straight into there like that. Super neat. And at the back, just comes out there and over the top like that to the T-piece. What else have I done? Painted up some nice new rear shocks so that they match everything else as well. Yeah, I think that just about covers it for now. So really pleased with the way this thing is looking, especially when you consider the horrific state that it was in before I started. So yeah, hopefully you like it as much as I do.
Okay, that's where we're going to end it for part 10 of building a beach buggy with me. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. Hopefully you noticed that I gave you a slightly longer episode than I normally do. That's my way of just saying sorry for leaving you hanging for a couple of months, because I had, a surprising amount of people messaging asking when the next video was going to be out. So really appreciate the support. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, we are getting very close to 100,000 views, and if I do go over that, if this video tips us over that 100,000, in the next one we're going to do a prize giveaway. So if you don't want to miss that, subscribe to the channel, follow us on Instagram, Neil of Steel, blah blah blah. You know all that stuff. You know what to do. Go get out there, whatever project it is you've got on the go. Go and put some hours in on it, and if you do, you'll end up with something that's looking as nice and shiny as that thing under the cover over there. So thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time. See ya.